All right, ready?
Yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Munro. That was shitty. That was so big.
Where am I? What's happening?
I guess what you should said is, am I ready? As in you. I'm ready. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, I'm never ready, so honestly, like I always feel like I'm never ready. All right, we'll start again. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Munro Live. Today we're going to be looking at the all-new Grand Cherokee. This one's kind of near and dear to our hearts in that we've spent significant amounts of time in the past kind of working with different teams who had a part in the development of this vehicle. And so, you know, from the outside looking in, from a consulting perspective, we did get some early preview into some of the stuff that we're going to see today. So it's exciting to see it come to market, come to fruition, and see how things actually play out in the production. So when Munro works with different companies, we're not always afforded the opportunity to see the final article. We often get brought in very early concept development stages, and sometimes we don't always get to see the final thing come to market. Or if we do, it doesn't mean that we'll actually get to see the physical product. So this is exciting. So this is the plug-in hybrid. So if you're unfamiliar with what that is, there is a higher voltage lithium-ion battery that supplements powertrain effort. So this one's got a 17 kilowatt hour battery. So that gives it about 25 miles of all electric range, in addition to the more conventional 2.0 liter i4 turbocharged gas engine. So in essence, what they're doing is they're packaging two vehicles worth of powertrains, right? The battery is not a full BEV size naturally, but it is a lot of stuff to fit in one vehicle package. So with that being said, obviously we're doing a Hoist review today. So Kevin, maybe you want to get us started at the front end of the vehicle and start pointing out a few things that you saw.
If you want to come this way, Eric, and kind of look forward here. But in general, the entire front cradle assembly is aluminum. It's a conjunction between a very large cast aluminum bulkhead on each side with extrusions running across, welded in place. And then essentially everything here for this forward tension link is also extruded. So you have a series of extrusions bracing this area, running through here, grabbing this tension link. And then there's also an extrusion that bows across and runs in front of the cradle itself that complements some of the pedestrian, I would say, protection mitigations they have here for small overlap rigid barrier or SORB. And you can kind of see that pretty well here, and just how much reinforcement is present in this area for that test.
Yeah, so they not only put the aluminum extrusion, they've got this steel piece. It's a stamped steel weldment that gets gloved over the end of it. Presumably they want that to be a little bit more rigid, less prone to puncture or deformation during the initial points of the event. And then as Kevin was mentioning, if you look at it from a more gross manner, just about all of the structure in this area, to include how this link is packaged, this little triangular section here, and then if you were to theoretically go right through this longitudinal member, there's extrusions that are all sort of in line with like a diagonal impact load case, which is what SORB is. It's only 25% of the vehicle taking the impact. So some pretty concerted countermeasures in the front of the vehicle here so that this subframe in the cradle is helping manage that energy during the impact event.
And if you were to look, kind of come in through here, Eric, look, you can see where the reinforcement is for SORB, but then you can also get to see where the main engine bay rail runs just above it, which is actually pretty far outward of the cradle itself. So there's a lot of mass placed outward here to help with that specific event itself.
In terms of the suspension, this is a relatively conventional SLA, or short arm, long knuckle suspension. And this is would be considered like a mostly aluminum suspension. So you've got a forged aluminum knuckle, you've got a forged camber link. It looks like, well, actually, I think this tension link may actually be low pressure die casting. I'd have to look at it a little bit more closely. And then you've got also a forged aluminum upper control arm. So given that all those are aluminum, mostly forged, There's a pretty deliberate effort from a weight savings perspective. When you're going to take weight out of a vehicle, the suspension corners become paramount, not just for the overall weight of the vehicle, but in terms of the drivability, right? So there's not all masses are created equal. So there's different types of that in terms of vehicle dynamics. There's sprung and unsprung mass. So meaning the vehicle suspension, if it is carrying the mass, meaning in this static component, right, this shield, for example, this would be unsprung because it's not, or I'm sorry, this would be sprung mass because it is not moving with the suspension module itself. When the suspension module is going up and down through its travel cycles, that mass gets exponentially heavier, relatively speaking, because of that momentum and inertia in the suspension system. So that translates to the driver in terms of the feedback. How tight does the vehicle feel? How well is it rebounding and maintaining road contact? Does it feel clunky? All of those types of things really start to come into play. So the fact that they're taking a very deliberate approach to do mostly forged aluminum, most everything in the suspension corner, is saying that they really wanted to get weight out of those suspension corners.
Yeah, and this vehicle's target market is pretty wide, right? So it has to compete with a lot of the domestic offerings like the Explorer, but it's also targeted very specifically at some of the very high-end European offerings as well, which, and this particular vehicle itself, and you'll see obviously with all the underbody shielding it has, unlike a BMW or an Audi, is much more off-road centric, and just constantly in our dealings across the street, Jeepness is a tax that Jeeps pay heavily to offer, a lot of capability to their customers. There's a high expectation of how a Jeep should perform off-road and what it can do or can't do before either the body or powertrain starts derating and things of that nature. And almost everything on this has been massaged from the last generation. And the suspension for both front and rear is essentially all new in comparison to the last platform, the WK2 platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we walk a little bit further back, I mean, this platform, as Kevin was mentioning in terms of the overhaul, depending on which models you compare, the base Laredo versus, fully decked out Summit PHEV or something like that, the weight has gone down between 300 and 600 pounds relative to the previous generation. And while doing that, they made the vehicle roughly 3.5 inches longer overall and 2 inches taller, relatively speaking, to the previous generation. So kudos to the Stellantis team for taking a pretty significant chunk of weight out of the vehicle.
And I think from their perspective, this is probably the first vehicle to launch with cast aluminum shock towers as well.
Yes.
It's still mostly steel, a lot of high-strength steel throughout it, but the shock towers are aluminum, and then the upper front-end module has a lot of extrusions, placed throughout it as well.
Yeah.
But as we get back to here, you really start to see essentially you mentioned the mass that came out of this platform. Well, there's a lot of mass added into this particular trim level because it's a PHEV to protect the underbody. And essentially, there's a series of high voltage components. It's very hard to see kind of what we're even looking at, but you can kind of look through here and take a look. But almost everything for the PHEV is packaged under the floor itself. It's tight. There's not a lot of room to work with. And you can see essentially the layering of materials and components. And I'll show you kind of some examples of some parts that are coming in probably normally on the normal WL line itself, if you want to kind of swing this way, and this trans cross member. And I don't have a lot of experience with the PHEV variant itself and anyway, prior to seeing it here, but so we have this cast aluminum trans cross member, and if you want to rotate down and look up, we have this very large extrusion that's running across to support essentially all these skid plates and the trans cross member itself, but you can see these clearance holes and then access holes. Essentially here, all the conventional powertrain goes up and is decked in a very conventional fashion, no pun intended. And then you have essentially all these separate PHEV specific components then coming to the vehicle and being bolted onto it. So there's just a series of stack up of materials and assembly process throughout this. It's rough. I don't want to say it's a terrible job, but it's just indicative of essentially electrifying a longitudinal gas platform, especially with the requirements that a Jeep has, because there's just an unbelievable amount of mass and stack ups that you can see through here. coming through here to extrusion to here, and then just using the different materials. You have to paint, coat some of them. It's very interesting to see the execution, and it's tough, right? We know what the Jeep's off-road requirements are, and there's not a lot of vehicles that can pass that. So
yeah, there's a pretty rigorous amount of testing that drives a lot of these shields and protection that we're seeing underbody. So overall layout here, we've got exhaust, prop shaft, some of the the cables and the low voltage wiring transferring between one half of the battery packs here and then the other half on this side. So they kind of bifurcate it down the center, run this stuff for the ICE variant or the ICE specific components, meaning prop shaft and the exhaust system down the center of those two. And then, we get to the rear suspension here. But, one thing I look at under here, I'm like, well, how difficult would it be to take this architecture and package a BEV battery, right? So a fully electric variant, which we've seen. We've seen people go from an ICE platform to a BEV variant, so internal combustion platform to a battery electric vehicle. Some of the things that I start to look at is the whole interface to the sill section, meaning on the body in white, the structural section that runs longitudinally on either side of the vehicle, the Z height of the current pack relative to that. How might they gain some space for a pack to nest in here? Clearly, this is meeting the ground clearance requirements as this is a production vehicle. So presumably, the battery pack on the BEV could also be roughly at this nominal height. And by this nominal height, this includes shields, of course, so the battery itself, I would estimate is roughly between 20 and 25 millimeters above this in vehicle and Z. So if this is 17 kilowatt hours, right, the BEV pack could move quite a bit further forward, perhaps a little bit further rearward, obviously, because the fuel tank goes away. And then obviously the whole section down the middle, the cross cart. So those are relatively obvious changes that would need to occur. But more than that, I'd be willing to bet that given all the mounting provisions, especially for this variant being a BEV, for all these massive bolts and fasteners and reinforcements to go into the body structure, I think that they would need to develop mostly all new underbody. So between sill to sill and then roughly at the kick-up, so that's like the second row seat area roughly, fore, aft in vehicle, all the way to the dash panel area in vehicle. Everywhere in between those bounds may actually observe a all new floor pan, right? And some of the cross-car impact countermeasures and some of the skid plates and different things that we're seeing on the PHEV, that structure still needs to be there, meaning it still needs to pass the side pole impact. If an off-road variant is offered, they still need skid plates to protect the battery pack. I would just imagine that the execution of that is going to change dramatically, right? When you make a major architectural change like that, in many ways, it's like creating an all-new vehicle. So a pretty substantial amount of work. But as you can see on this one, with a PHEV package, everything is extremely tight, right? We've got measured in millimeters, right? We've got fractions of space between the exhaust mounting bracket, the shield then to protect the half shaft, right? The brackets to hold the half shaft in place. So, especially in areas like this, you're seeing a massive amount of packaging and engineering going into making sure that they're able to fit everything first and foremost. But moreover, when you start to account for decking clearances, static and dynamic clearances, right, as the vehicle's going through its different use cases, it is not easy to get all of these components in a vehicle.
No, and the downside about kind of electrifying something like this is a lot of these components become parasitic to the body structure, and like we're missing a bolt here on this brace coming across, but you have this casting, as Jordan mentioned, it's picking up, which is nice. It's grabbing exhaust supports, comes across here to a tube weldment, and then but you can kind of see in here, flanking this battery pack is kind of a like a T-shaped extrusion that's running down, so you can see where all these bolts are running into the rocker structure itself, and it flanks the battery pack itself. And then that kind of speaks to Jordan's point again about side pole. Since the body was never really meant to protect a battery pack like this, so you end up augmenting a significant amount of structure with the body because it is relatively parasitic. I think this weighs about 1,300 pounds more than a ICE, depending on what powertrain is in it, overland Grand Cherokee. So it's pretty substantial.
You know, and when we talk about like lean design or optimization, when I look under here, it's always tough with a PHEV. I always say, you know, the burden of a PHEV is quite literally you're packaging almost 2 vehicles, powertrains worth of stuff in one vehicle. So it's tough to analyze from a lean design perspective simply because of the architecture setup. But like some of the things that I would like to see kind of go away or modify, and just as easily as I say I would like to see them be optimized, I could probably give you 5 reasons why they're there as well. You know, but like there's a substantial amount of fasteners, right? I think in some of these spans we're seeing 8, 9, 10 fasteners within the span of 2 feet, you know, and some of those, like, to me, I'd be like, can we turn some tabs up via the stamping? Can we replace some of the threaded fasteners with index points via that stamped piece? Can we weld it versus bolt it in? Which is tough because in an application like this, you want to be able to service it. If you damage a plate, you want to be able to drop it and replace the plate only without having, you know, this giant weldment that you now made as one part be replaced. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But I would imagine that over the next couple of model years, especially in a mid-cycle action environment, halfway through the life cycle of the vehicle, I would like to see some of this go away for Stellantis' sake, just in terms of the number of steps. But as I said, I could probably come up with a few reasons as to why it ended up the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of serviceability built into this, and
sure.
It's tough. It's far from optimized, but we see both sides of that, where you have to work with essentially serviceability, manufacturing, and everyone has a slice of that pie, and helps dictate some of these requirements, which makes building PHEV specifically extremely difficult.
Sure. So as we move to the rear suspension, it is a 5-link or a multi-link rear suspension, obviously independent rear. If we didn't mention it in the front, this is equipped with the optional air suspension package, right? So we've got big old air struts here. And then we've got, you know, that's connected to your spring link down in the bottom here. What's interesting about these bottom links, and we've seen this on a few different vehicle applications, is although this is black, and so intuitively you may look at it and say, oh, it's probably steel because it's painted black. This is actually an aluminum extruded link. And as far as multi-link rear suspensions go, and specifically the spring link itself, the extruded aluminum lower link, we've done a lot of different types of weight studies and cost studies and so forth. This type of link is incredibly efficient, right? In tension, right, aluminum is actually quite efficient. The extruded profile is very conducive to what a spring link needs to do and be as a component and the functions it needs to perform. And obviously being aluminum, right, it's very good in this environment, which sees a lot of stone impingement, stone blasts, which is why these little guards are here. And so when you think about long-term durability and sort of the resilience of the vehicle, you know, it's overall a good option. So every time I see a link similar to this, you know, it makes us say, well, good job. It's a pretty good option. You know, whereas a lot of their competitors in this vehicle segment, you'll see this be a large cast aluminum link. And the difficulty with castings, although they absolutely have their place, is there's not many functions of this part other than to hold the spring, to connect the knuckle to the cradle, and perhaps, like we're seeing on the backside here, support some harnesses that go out to the electric parking brake, likely the wheel speed sensor and so forth. So a casting, I would like to see serve many more functions than just essentially 2 or 3 here, right? It makes the business case for a casting a little bit harder to justify.
No, absolutely. And then it's efficient and fast, you know, as far as the extrusions, you're extruding the length itself. And then I'm not sure how many hits are involved with stamping this, but this particular piece, but it's a strategy, you know, suited for a little bit higher volume.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell because it's painted, but if you just keyed into what Kevin said, stamping, If you might be wondering, well, you just said extruded. Why did you say stamping? A lot of these pieces that are secondarily, so meaning after the part is extruded, are then removed from the part. They'll do so in a stamping-like process where they're essentially shearing the part off, right? So they're taking that material out versus machining it, right? So in a high volume scenario, it's going to be much more cost effective and cycle time efficient than trying to do like a CNC machining operation. They're good from a lot of perspectives, and especially if you happen to work in a startup environment or anything like that, you can iterate quickly. As Kevin mentioned, the tools are inexpensive. You can turn one out quickly. So if you need to make an update to the profile or what have you, it's conducive to that. Anything else you're seeing here in the rear suspension, Kevin?
No, I mean, not for specific as far as like the PHEV and kind of our focus here being from electrification. Maybe they can stop painting them. I like to see aluminum control arms, save you some money. So
yeah,
but.
Well, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the Hoist review video. Pretty excited to finally see this one out on the road. If you are interested in some of the other vehicles that we're tearing down, go ahead and reach out to us at sales@leandesign.com. We've now got the R1T, the Model S Plaid, the Model Y side-by-side report, the Lightning, many available for purchase. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
See you soon.